Hey guys, welcome back to the SDBO YouTube channel. Today we have Kent Miller on as our guest. He is a demographer. He started the Demographics company, the Dentagraphics company, and he graduated from the Ohio State with degrees in undergraduate and a master's in urban planning. So he spent a few years in urban planning and development, figured out where people were going to be, how to build a city, basically, from my understanding, and then decided to break away and start his own company that is now a nationwide company used by lots of dentists to be able to plan their future business growth. So, Kent, you want to take it away?
Yeah, John, thanks for the introduction. And everybody, thanks for listening in. As John said there, my name is Kent Miller. I run Dentagraphics. We are a company that's been around for about 10 years now, as of 2023 here. And what we really specialize in is market research specifically for dental practice owners, both aspiring practice owners, that's most of our clientele, and current practice owners who might be looking to relocate or maybe open a second or a third or a fourth location, or whatever location they're on, as well as buy a practice. So essentially what we're trying to help our clients do is find the best areas for their businesses. So which areas are going to offer them both the highest level of professional and personal satisfaction, returns, which areas will be most opportune for them. So I prepared a quick presentation today to sort of start with kind of the theory of why we do what we do. And I think that's something that's really important to follow along with, just so that when we eventually get into the practice, and I'll show everyone the software that we give to STDBO members for free every single year. We'll walk through that later on in this presentation, but I want to start with kind of the theory so we know what we're doing when we do jump into the software and why we're doing it.
Awesome.
So I'll go ahead and share my screen here. I've got a little PowerPoint prepared. And so that should be coming up now. Can you see that there, John?
Yeah, it's looking great.
Okay, perfect. So I call this presentation How to Choose the Right Location for Your Dental Practice. And if your screen's big enough, you'll see that the word your is italicized. And the reason for that is that no two practices are identical, or most practices at least are not identical. Everyone could be looking for something that's a little bit different. So just because, your friend found something that worked for them, or a mentor found something that worked for them, just keep in mind that that might not necessarily be the best route for you specifically. Just a little bit about me. I know I kind of already gave my bio here. That QR code goes to my LinkedIn. So if anybody's watching this and wants to connect on LinkedIn, feel free to scan that code, and that'll be easy to connect there. As I said, Dentagraphics, we've been around for about 10 years now. My background, both undergraduate and master's degrees, are in urban planning. Prior to Dentagraphics, what I was doing was working in the public sector. And I specifically was working at a nonprofit that contracted with the city of Columbus, Ohio, in order to encourage businesses to open in areas where there were lots of commercial vacancies. So of course the city didn't like having commercial vacancies, no tax revenue, kind of looked like a sort of rundown part of the city. Obviously a lot of these areas were lower income neighborhoods, hence why there weren't as many businesses in those markets. And so what my job was to do was to look at any economic data that we could find, as well as go out and actually interview the residents and ask them, what types of businesses would you like to see in your community? What's missing from this area? Where do you have to, drive across town to get something all the time? And so at the end of our project, we might present that, hey, a hardware store is really needed in this community, or maybe a bike shop, or a cafe, or a local grocery store, something along those lines that we thought could be supported by the residents, and that then the city might try to encourage to open in that area. About 10 years ago then, I had a buddy who was working in the dental industry and kind of knew what I was doing, and suggested, hey, I think this would be really cool for a lot of dental practice owners there's a little bit of research out there, but I think it could be a little bit better. So he and I kind of put our heads together, and here we are, 10 years later, and I'm still running the company, and we've seen a lot of growth, and it's been a fun ride.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, as far as I know, you guys are like the only exclusively dental group out there. So it's pretty
thanks for bringing that up. I almost forget sometimes. We are dental specific. We work with dentists of all specialties. So whether you're a general dentist, an oral surgeon, a pediatric dentist, obviously endodontist, periodontist, orthodontist, we work with everybody, and everything is customized. So what we're looking for a pediatric dentist is going to be a little bit different from what we're looking for an oral surgeon. So I wanted to start this presentation with just why market research. Why should somebody even bother with this? And really, there are a couple of big reasons that come to mind for me right away. The first one is that market research enables you to eventually get into the practice that you want, right? So you've probably got a vision, maybe not today, right? If you're still in school and kind of trying to figure it out, some of you might already have a vision. But after a couple of years of practice in particular, and maybe you go and work at a DSO, maybe you go and you're an associate in a locally owned practice, you kind of get a vision for, hey, what types of dentistry do I enjoy practicing more than others? Or what types of markets, now that I've practiced in 3 or 4 areas, do I like a little bit better than others? So doing this research allows you to start or buy a practice in an area that not only offers good opportunity, but also is a good fit with your vision and allows you to live the lifestyle that you want. Nobody wants to be committed to essentially working a job for 10 or 20 years that they're not enjoying, of course. Secondly, I've got here better location equals better business. Each patient, keep in mind, and this stat's a couple of years old now, I believe, is worth about $1,000 to your practice on average when they walk through that door the first time, right? So if you get even 5 or 10 additional patients over the course of an entire commercial lease, which is typically 10 years, that can really add up. Market research doesn't cost anywhere near that. So it can really pay off to do this. And of course, if you're getting an extra 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 patients per month, that really, really adds up. And then the last one, this is kind of the less fun part, but location is really hard to change. I just mentioned a lease is 10 years, typically in the commercial world. And so trying to get out of your lease after a year or two is going to be difficult if you're not enjoying it. So you want to make sure you kind of measure twice and cut once, so to speak. Just some high-level framing. I think these are sort of common early search discussion points, or maybe even mistakes sometimes that people come to us having kind of not gotten into the right frame of mind yet that I think can be really helpful, which is one, to set your expectations. So you're probably not going to find an area that's super high income, has no other dental practices, or maybe it's not super high income, but it's just like a desirable place to be for a lot of people. And there's no other competition. And on top of that, you found a practice or a piece of real estate, if you're starting up, that's like at the corner of First and Main, super prominent intersection, and rent is really cheap. This is all about assessing what the trade-offs are that are available to us and finding the best combination of trade-offs. What I don't want anybody to do, this being SDBO, I know everyone's pretty entrepreneurial, spend 15, 20 years waiting to find that perfect location so they can start or buy their practice. I do talk to people who have done that, and I think everyone probably would like to see themselves in a practice before that time period has come. The second one here, unique, as I've kind of already touched on that. Every search is a little bit different. So just because you read something on Dental Town or on a Facebook group that, hey, this is awesome, this worked for me, doesn't necessarily mean that's going to work for you and your vision. We see our process, so the entire site selection process, as having 4 primary components, 3 or 4 really. One is the market side, and that's what we specialize in here. So that's that one on the right, looking at the level of supply and demand for care in a particular market, looking at the fit with your target patient base. But we've got to balance that with some other pieces of the equation. The first one being personal, right? So where do you want to live? I was just talking to John here. He's in, I hope this is okay if I say this. Yeah. He's in San Antonio right now. but eventually wants to move back to Washington.
Yeah.
And, that's obviously got to be something that's going to work for you. Where do you want to live? Where do you want to be near your family? Or how close do you want to be to your family? Do you want to be super close, not so close, really far away? And that's got to be sustainable for you. So if you want to be in Washington State, there's no sense in me telling you, hey, here's a great location in San Antonio, because it's just not going to work for you long term. Some people come to us and say, hey, I'll go anywhere. And 99 times out of 100, maybe even 100 times out of 100, eventually once we start going through questions like, where does your family live? Do you want to be able to get back to them? Do you want to be near an airport? Do you want to be near restaurants to go out in? Or do you want to be out in the country? Actually, nobody's really interested in every square inch of the country. Everyone has at least some preferences. So you want to start to think about that process before really we get to the market stage that we specialize in. Now, after the market side, so after we say, okay, doctor, here are the top 2 or 3 areas you should be focusing your search on, is going to be the real estate side. What a property looks like, how much it costs, is it visible, is there parking, is there signage? And I always tell my clients, don't blindly go to an A-rated market just because it's an A-rated market. If you're going to get an F-rated property, right? There's no visibility, it's super expensive, you can't even build out the practice that you want because of the layout of the space. Instead, even though I only work on the market side, would prefer you would go to a B-rated market to get an A-rated property as an alternative. So our goal from this market research at the initial stages is going to be to help you identify, typically within a larger region like greater San Antonio or greater Indianapolis, where are the top 2, 3, maybe 4 areas to focus your search on. Then let's go see what properties look like so we can fill in that other half of the equation.
And
I've got to go ahead, John.
Sorry, if I'm understanding correctly, let's say that you're looking at the greater San Antonio area, right? Depending on the person and what type of practice they're wanting, what type of vision that they have, the areas will light up differently based off of the individual and the type of practice that they want. It's not always going to light up in the same very specific areas for every single individual, right?
Absolutely. So the easiest example of that probably is 2 people come to us. One says, I want to have a cosmetic dental practice. And somebody else says, I want more of a Medicaid-oriented practice.
Right.
The results probably are going to be a little bit different.
Right.
But there are all kinds of varying degrees there in terms of some people like working with families. Some people don't like working with kids. Some people speak a second language, and in certain parts of the country, that's really important. Other people don't, and that's going to impact which areas are going to be most opportune for each particular search. I've got a 4 set of variables here. Practice. This is if you're somebody who's thinking about buying. There is going to be this extra set of variables to consider when you're thinking about where you're going to practice. So in addition to the personal side, the market side, and the real estate side, if you want to buy a practice, you can only buy a practice that already exists. So you can't just go somewhere where there isn't a practice already, like you can as a startup and say, okay, this is where I want to be. You're limited to just what's already out there. And more specifically, you're limited to the practices that are looking to sell, which in a particular year is not a whole lot of them. So we've got to look here at production. We've got to look at, is this the type of practice that you even want to buy? If it's a PPO practice and you only want to do fee for service and day one you want to drop all the insurance plans, that's maybe not a good fit, right? Or you've at least got to understand, hey, there's going to be a transition period. I might lose some patients. So that is a 4 set of variables to consider if you are in the acquisition space. I'll go through some of these other slides a little bit, or I'll go through this slide at least a little bit quicker. Personal life, I think this one's pretty straightforward. You got to live near areas that you want to be in. And don't just think about today. You don't necessarily need to try to guess what your life is going to be like, 30, 40 years down the line. But if hey, in 5 or 10 years, I just got married, we want to have kids, and it'd be nice to be near at least one of our families. Think about that before you start the practice in an area that is not near family. Now, once we get past the personal side, to get into a little bit more detail on the market side, I touched earlier on what we're looking for in terms of supply and demand to kind of take it back to Econ 101, but then also that sort of customized target patient base and practice strategy that makes every search a little bit different. Here we've actually ranked how important each of those is to us. So the number one thing for me is there's got to be demand for care. If there aren't potential patients in an area, you cannot be successful. Doesn't matter how good of a practice owner you are. Doesn't matter if there aren't any other competing practices in the area. If there aren't people who need dental care, or that's because it's such a rural area that there just aren't people, or there just aren't people who are interested in dental care or who want dental care in that market, then you can't be successful no matter what. The number two most important thing for me is target patient base. So, it might be sustainable for a year or two to locate in a market that looks good on paper, demand, supply and demand say, hey, this is a good area to practice in. But if it's not allowing you to practice the type of dentistry that you want to practice, you're going to burn out. Give it a year or 2 years, however long it takes. If you sign that 10-year lease, though, it's probably going to happen before 10 years. So make sure that you've customized your search and only go to areas that are a good fit with your vision. Now, the last thing I care about, and this is one that people are always, I think, especially early in their careers, really concerned about, is supply, aka competition. So, of course, we prefer not to practice in an area that is oversaturated if less saturated markets were available to us. But I care, like I said, a lot more about, is there a market for care? You can be successful in a really competitive area, right? There are lots of really, really successful practices in New York, in California, these super, super competitive markets. It just might take a little bit longer to get going at first. It might require that you check more boxes, so to speak. You dot more I's and cross more T's. You've got a nice modern website. You're offering maybe some extra special procedures, or you're accepting some more insurances, something that kind of gives you that competitive edge where if you were in a less competitive market, you might not have to do all those things. But there are very few markets nationwide, probably none, that I would say are so competitive that you just cannot be successful, because really, to me, that would actually be more of an issue of demand rather than supply. So we like to think about demand in a couple of ways, really two. I touched on earlier total market size and then also per capita demand. So the first one, think about total market size. If you're in an area where there are 1 million people, there are a lot of people who need dental care in that market. Rural areas have their pros. So I'm certainly not saying if you want to practice in a rural area to not do that, but just know that there are fewer potential patients. Know that if you want to offer something that's a little bit more specialized, that maybe only treats 1% of the market, right? You're a periodontist and you want to do implants, or you want to have a fee-for-service practice, something that's not the majority of the market. It's going to be harder to do that. It's going to be harder to have a successful business model in a town of 2,000 people if only 1% of people are your target audience. Additionally, with rural areas, if one new practice opens in that area, so maybe you're one of 2 practices, now you're one of 3, that's a huge increase in the level of competition. If you're in California and there are 1,000 practices right in your backyard and practice number 1,001 opens up, not a big deal. So you are at a little bit higher risk for that sort of sudden change in those smaller communities. But really the big thing is just, do we have enough potential patients in this particular market?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I've heard you mention this as well, and I think dentists get way too focused in on, who's the dentist down the street from me. They get too hyper focused on my competition, right? And it's one thing I've heard you say, which is actually really, really interesting, is all things being equal, the place with the greater population density is the place that you would prefer to place and start a business. Is that correct?
Yeah. All things being equal. So
right.
That would include things like income and saturation, really.
Right.
So if we just said, here's a market of 10,000 people and the median household income is $75,000 a year, and the ratio of residents per dental office is 2,000 to 1. And then here's a market of 100,000 people, $75,000 a year in income, and 2,000 to 1. I'm going to prefer that market with 100,000 people.
Right.
We do prefer larger markets, all things being equal,
right.
To smaller communities. Now, in terms of demand and total market size, there is one way that we can address population density. So if we are in a small town and there just aren't very many people living in close proximity, or maybe we're a specialist and generally we're only going to be working with a relatively small segment of the overall population, if we've got good accessibility, so people who maybe live 20 miles away, 30 miles away, can get to our practice fairly quickly, that can help us overcome situations where we don't have a lot of potential patients in close proximity for whatever reason. Of course, all of this is particularly important to specialty practices, as I just touched on a second ago, who are only treating a relatively small segment of the population. So population density is particularly important to specialists, and you'll see that the vast majority of specialty practices are located in just a handful of large and medium-sized cities. There are not very many oral surgeons in rural America. So the other side of demand, in addition to just how many potential patients there are in an area, is per capita demand for care. So first of all, income. Can people afford care? Obviously, everyone, I'm sure, wants to treat everyone that they can. But if there's just not enough disposable income, that can be a challenge in terms of treatment acceptance rates, in terms of even people kind of really seeking a dentist out, which can be related to treatment acceptance as well, or sort of even the opportunity to present treatment. Education is going to be related to that, of course, but it's a little bit different from income. So what I'd like to emphasize here is that, let's say somebody who just finished their master's degree or doctoral degree, they value their dental health, but they may not have a whole lot of income yet, right? They're in their 20s or they're in their 30s. And so on paper, they might be earning less than a blue collar community that's mostly home to people in their 50s down the street, even though they've got higher education. So these two can be a little bit different, and this will, of course, also impact your target patient base. And then age, of course, certain populations need a little bit more care than others. Typically kind of older adults under the sort of 75, 80 age range are going to need a little bit more care and want that treatment. Certain other populations, kind of that like 18-ish age range for implants, for example, can require more care than young professionals who are 25 years old and always took care of their teeth pretty well, don't really have a lot of need for care. And actually, a lot of our clients in some of those sort of young professional neighborhoods in big cities say, yeah, I've got 1 million patients who come in, but we kind of do a cleaning and that's really it. Yeah. And obviously, it's a little bit more challenging than some of those bigger cases.
Right.
Just one quick example here to kind of touch on some of these concepts. Actually, what we were talking about here, John, where we've got two markets. Area number one has 100,000 households with a median household income of $75,000 a year. Area two having 10,000 households with a median household income of $100,000 a year. If somebody came to me and said, hey, I want to work with mostly high income households, I want to practice cosmetic dentistry, I want my patients to care more about experience than price, area number one might actually be a better fit for them. And the reason for that is that really what we're saying with area number one is that there are 50,000 households in this area earning at least $75,000 a year or more. They might earn $76,000 a year. They might earn $750,000 a year, but at least 50,000 of them are earning, 50,000 of them are earning at least $75,000 a year. Whereas in market number two, all we know is we've got 5,000 households earning $100,000 a year or more. So in all likelihood, area number one probably has more of those higher income cosmetic type patients. Target patient base, I know I've already talked about a decent amount, but just what do you envision in terms of your target patient base? Put some thought into that. And obviously, if you do end up working with a company like ours, this is something that we're going to want to know so that we can customize your report and make it as applicable to you, or at least in our discussions, give you good advice specifically for your practice strategy. So a couple of different variables here. I know I kind of already touched on them, but average household size is the new one here. And this is basically just looking at, are there more families in the area or fewer families? So if you are a family dentist or a pediatric dentist, we might want to think about what is the overall presence of families relative to the market. And it's not necessarily a red flag if you're a pediatric dentist, say in an area where there aren't as many families, but just know that your marketing costs can be a little bit higher because now you've got to target specific households instead of being in like a suburban area where most family or most households are families. And so you can just say, okay, just send a mailer or just advertise to everybody in this area as you, whether it's mailers or digital marketing, say, okay, I want this more and more niche audiences, more and more specific audience. That tends to cost a little bit more. I mentioned lastly here, supply of practices, looking at competition in the area. So the first way that we do that is saturation. And that is looking at how many potential patients there are in an area per competing practice. So if you tell me, hey, there are 5 practices around the corner, that doesn't tell us, is this good or is this bad, right? Maybe you're in New York City and there are only 5 practices. Well, that would be awesome because there are 1 million patients. But if you're in a tiny, tiny little town and there are 5 practices, that's totally different. So we want to look at how many potential patients there are in an area. For most people, that's just the population. But if you're a pediatric dentist, typically we're looking at kids ages 0 to 11 rather than just 0 to 17 because obviously that population skews a little bit younger. Sure, you might have some patients in that 13 plus age range or 12 plus age range, but most of them are going to be in that 0 to 11, which is why we'll focus there. Orthodontic practices, typically we look at age 6 to 17. Beyond that, though, we even want to ask, who are these competing practices? So what we call character of competition. Is this a practice that has a nice modern website? They do tons of marketing. They've got 5 full-time doctors. They're open 5, 6, 7 days a week. Or is it maybe a smaller practice that's only open 1 or 2 days a week? They don't have a website. They barely answer the phone. And those are 2 really, really different competitors. So we can start by quantifying how many potential patients there are per competing practice, but then we're going to want to dig further into who those practices are. On the specialty side, things are blurring, right? So there are more and more multi-specialty practices, especially in certain markets. Texas is one of them. Florida is one of them. These really high growth areas where you've seen a lot more DSOs trying to keep everything in-house. Even the privately owned practice with 1 doctor on staff, we're seeing increasingly, they're taking the CE classes and they're trying to keep more in-house themselves as well. So there is a little bit of blurring of the lines there. And that's something that we've got to try and account for when we're starting to think about who the competing practices are. I won't spend too much time on real estate because that's not really our specialty, but just think about the actual property itself. We're looking at market conditions, what's going on in an area inside of, say, a 3-mile radius or a 10-minute drive time around a property, but we haven't specifically assessed, is this space a good layout for a dental practice? How much does it cost relative to other properties in the area or other similar properties in the area, I should say. And that's where we work hand in hand with a commercial real estate agent. So we'll kind of help you figure out where to narrow your search down, where you should even be looking. And then they'll say, okay, doctor, I'm looking in South Austin and I found these 3 properties that might work for you. We recommend typically working with somebody who, or really always, if you can, working with somebody who specializes in at least medical real estate. Dental is ideal, of course, because they're going to know how much square footage you need. They're going to know what layouts work. They're going to know all the ins and outs of a dental practice from a physical perspective. So just one more kind of quick example here. We have a scenario. This is an example I guess I gave earlier with the market grade, an A, low competition, good demand for care, good fit with your target patient base, but we can only find F-rated properties, which are expensive. There's no visibility. But we also have because we didn't just narrow down to one area, we have our B-rated market that we're looking at, and we find an A-rated property. Dentagraphics, of course, even though we're only on the market side, as I said earlier, would prefer that second scenario. A couple of quick tips and tricks just as we're getting to the end here of the theory piece. So growth, population growth, that is I think probably the most overrated variable when people come to us. Growth is great. Absolutely. I don't want to have like some, snippet of me saying growth is bad or something out there. Growth is great, but it's not the only thing to think about. So as I was saying earlier, I care, is there demand for care? Is the patient base in that area a good fit with your target patient base and your practice strategy? What does the level of competition look like? Then I get more into things like population growth. Growth, one, we're talking about the future, right? So like in 2019, if you asked me what 2020 was going to look like, or anybody else, or 2021, nobody would have known, right? And that's just one example. Obviously, it's a really extreme one. I hope the most extreme one in my lifetime. But 2008, 2009, same thing. There were a lot of people who made big investments that based off of certain things that didn't come to fruition. I live in New York, right where Amazon was supposed to build their HQ2. And for a couple of months when that was announced, I was getting a call probably 3 calls every 2 weeks or 2 calls every 3 weeks, something like that about, hey, Amazon's going to open here. I want to put my practice there. And Amazon didn't. I fortunately think that none of those people actually opened their practices there. But growth is a bit of an unknown. And, really most of the time we're talking about an increase of like just a couple of percentage points over the span of a couple of years. I want your practice to be successful the day that it opens. I don't want you to be twiddling your thumbs, waiting for all those people to move in 5 years from now.
Right.
Secondly, distinct groups. Sometimes we've got, one side of the train tracks is high income, one side is low income, and so that median household income might end up in the middle. And we've got to be able to decipher in a little bit more detail. Last one here, scale of analysis. When we're talking about all these numbers and we're saying the median household income is $75,000 a year, or there are 3,000 residents per general dental office in this market, the question is, how did we measure that? Was that a 3-mile radius? Was that a 10-minute drive time? Was that the zip code or the county? We always recommend looking at a couple of different scales of analysis. You're going to want them to reflect who the potential patient base is and who the potential competition is. There isn't going to be one, unless you're on some small island in the middle of the ocean, that is going to perfectly reflect the patient base and competition. So typically for most people, we say a 3-mile radius is a good place to start. If that's way too big, you're in New York, or it's way too small, you're out in West Texas, you can adjust from there. But for most people, a 3-mile scale is one good scale of analysis, and then you can kind of adjust up or down from there.
I've heard similarly that it's the smallest radius that can contain the closest 30,000 people to your practice.
Yeah.
More or less.
Yeah.
That's also a similar kind of scale.
It is, yeah. So we found that there are really infinite possibilities. Sometimes you end up with like a town of 25,000 people, and like you stretch into the next town to get that next 5,000 people. But that's a really good rule of thumb for where to start. Mm-hmm. And that's actually one that we use is when we're writing a report, we're going to look for, okay, what's that first scale of analysis that's going to cross into that 25, 30,000 population threshold. So yeah, great. I'm glad you brought that up. So when I was putting this presentation together, I wanted to think about, okay, what are the next steps? Say, I'm a dental student. What should I be doing next? One, personal side of the equation. I think that most people probably already have an answer to this question, or at least a reasonable answer to this question, but it can be challenging. Maybe you're from Texas, but your spouse is from another state, and you guys met somewhere else. So just kind of thinking about, okay, what do the next 5 or 10 years look like for us? And, if you're not ready to commit to a specific area, my advice would probably be to not start or buy a practice, get into practice ownership quite yet. Number 2, networking is, I know this is probably a strange one to hear with Dentagraphics, but if you want to buy a practice, just knowing more doctors not only might help you buy their practice, but they might have a friend who is thinking about selling and can recommend you for that. So we do see a lot of transitions happen sort of off market. And that's really why I bring that up, because we do have tools to help assist with those off-market transitions. But networking we've seen is a great way to get the inside track on those opportunities. The last one, before you sign that associate contract, if you're in a state that allows restrictive covenants, California, for example, does not, just make sure you know what that looks like. We have a lot of people who sign them and kind of don't really think too much about it. And then they realize, hey, this 5-mile radius really includes everything I was interested in, or this 10-mile radius means I'm going to have to go practice in this other town. And I always envisioned I'd practice in my hometown that I was an associate in. So just be really, really careful with those and know what they look like before you sign them.
Yeah, I think one of the things that struck a chord with me was I've heard an example of with this restrictive covenant that an associate couldn't work within a certain radius of any of the additional practices that this one owner had, right? And so it kind of created what they called like the Olympic ring effect, right? Where it was a circle lying over a circle over another circle. And so instead of just a 4-mile diameter area, it ended up being like 20 miles because there were all these practices scattered across the region.
Yep. Yeah. We do see a good number of those. Obviously, I'm not an employment attorney, and I don't know what would stack up in court, but you don't really want to have to sue your employer. It's obviously just a very
if you can just
awkward
avoid
scenario,
it.
so avoid it. Exactly. Yeah, if you can.
Yeah.
All right. So I've got a QR code here that'll take us straight into the theory part now of the presentation. Now that we've gone through, the practice part. Now that we've gone through the theory part. So if you're in front of your computer and you want to scan this, this will take you straight to our web application, specifically the Texas page. And if you're an SDBO member in 2023, 2024, you do have free access to our entire platform that's designed for aspiring practice owners. We call it our Start and Buy package. So just make sure you're logged in there, and you'll be able to access all the tools that I'm showing you on the screen here. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing, and I will switch the window that I am sharing. And then I'll walk through kind of a couple of these tools and maybe what a specific practice search might look like. All right. Can you see my screen here, John?
Yeah, looking great.
Awesome. Okay. So if you're wondering if you're signed in, if you are, you'll see your name top left here. If not, there are a couple of different prompts to sign in. There aren't any passwords or anything, so you can just enter your email address that is associated with SDBO, and we will send you a code that you can use to log in. You don't need to remember a password with us. So most of what I've talked about during the presentation was specifically demographic related, which again has applications for both startups and acquisitions, as well as, of course, relocations and second, third, fourth, et cetera, locations. So in this web application, when I'm on this demographics tab, or if you scan the QR code, where you've been taken to is this Texas breakdown. You can compare any state, right? So if I want to look at like, what does New Mexico look like, or what does Arizona look like, I can just hover, or if I click, I can get a better breakdown of those states. But if I were to look specifically at Texas, I can see we've got a population of 29.7 million residents, 7,728 general dental practices in our database as of Monday, October 30th. This number is always changing. So we've got a full-time research team. They're constantly looking for new practices that have opened. They're looking for practices that have closed or relocated. And so if you're logging on someday after today, this number is probably going to be a little bit different. If we took the 29.7 million residents, divided them by the 7,728 general dental practices, we would get a ratio of 3,845 residents per general dental office statewide. Now, there are going to be huge, huge differences when we compare specific areas within Texas. So if you're thinking high level, hey, do I want to be in Florida or Arizona or Michigan? Just know that if you're in Miami, what Jacksonville or what the Panhandle look like isn't really going to have anything to do with the success of your practice. So we can look at the state level data to get a really, really high level picture, but ultimately we're going to want to get a lot more specific than that. So let's say we're interested in Bexar County down here, or maybe Travis County, right? A common search for a lot of people here. Bexar County, we can see has about 3,849 residents per general dental office, whereas Travis County, unsurprisingly, a little bit more competitive, about 3,300 to 1, with the median household income a little bit higher, $82,000 a year versus $62,000 a year. So actually a pretty significant $20,000 a year difference. And you can just imagine kind of, hey, do I want to be in Houston? Do I want to be in Dallas? Do I maybe want to be in suburban Dallas, up in Collin County, the most competitive county in the state, with about 2,300 residents per dental office. But you can see, again, these trade-offs, right? The median household income, $100,000 a year. That's typically what we see as the best predictor of the ratio of residents per general dental office in an area, is its median household income. Let's say we do want to be in Collin County. When I click on Collin County, I get a little bit more data, so I can see the observed growth in that market. As of today, this is 2020 through 2022. I know in the next couple of months, we'll be updating this to 2023, so you may see those numbers update here soon. Looking at some of these other numbers here, what stands out to me, home ownership, 63%. So people are kind of not super committed to staying in the area long term. This is probably going to vary quite a bit from the south to the north side of the county. And we've got about 2/3 of residents speaking English, a bigger deal down in Bexar County, more than likely. So if you don't speak Spanish in Bexar County, 58.5% of residents are native English speakers. Now, where I think this tool starts to get a lot more tangible is at this area level. So this is designed to ask, where within a particular area is the best place for me to practice? So if I were to draw, say, an area like this around San Antonio, maybe this is my area of interest. I want to practice downtown, maybe up over shirts over here, something like this, which is a pretty common search area for us. Now we're going to weight the variables over here based off of what's important to us. I'll give you guys kind of a generic formula to start with for general dental practices, which is kind of where I would start a search if I were writing a report myself. But obviously, as we've said a bunch of times on this call, there are differences based off of who you are and what type of practice you're looking for. This commercial concentration, while that's loading, looks at how many businesses there are in an area. So this helps you find areas where there are more coffee shops and grocery stores and restaurants, and not because that's going to be convenient for you and your hygienist on your lunch break, but because these are areas that are busier and are more likely to offer commercial real estate. They've got more eyeballs, people driving around. So if we increase the importance of this, we're going to find areas that are more likely to offer commercial real estate and are just generally busier. Now, when I ran this search, what I got back was a shaded map here showing me areas shaded from blue to red, or less desirable to more desirable. We like to think of it as cold to hot. So it looks like based off of the data that came back and the way that I weighed these variables, this area right here rates pretty well. And this centered on 135 Barrel Drive. We used a 1 mile radius around that address. And that radius is always going to adjust based off of the population density in the area. So we're going to collect at least 20,000 residents with this radius. So right about, you're just a little shy of that 30,000 figure that we were talking about earlier. This gives us a little bit more precision. But within that 1 mile radius, we collected a population of 22,000 residents, only one existing general dental practice, which of course is a ratio of 22,000 to 1. Now, the median household income is $56,000, $57,000 a year, so maybe a little bit lower than some people are looking for. If we decided that's the case for us, we can always come back over here and increase the importance of income. Since we are at 100% total weighting, we will have to decrease the importance of something else to increase the importance of income. You also saw all the practices showed up here. So as I mentioned, we've got a research team that's constantly looking for practices that are opening, closing, relocating. So if I click on this practice here, here's a Bright Ed Dental, probably a brand that everybody on this call is familiar with. Here's their website for that particular location. We do also rate every practice. We talked about character of competition earlier. One way to think about that is this a practice that is performing well digitally? Do they have a website? Does that website do well in terms of SEO, search engine optimization? So are they going to show up at the top of Google or not? Do they have Google reviews? Are they good? Are they bad? How many of them do they have? And then every practice nationwide has received a score somewhere between poor and elite. So these bright blue practices here, these are elite. Whereas a poor practice would be one maybe like without a website or an old website and bad reviews. And that's this practice over here. We do have the ability to layer on additional data sets. So like if we think, okay, maybe I want to work with families, specifically older kids in the house, we can click on, or we can turn on high schools or really any grade level. I turned on just high schools here. This is a private school serving grades 9 through 12. It's got 770 students enrolled, so that enrollment size is important. Just because there are a couple of high schools around, sometimes you'll see like they have 50 students or 20 students. So this is a decent sized one. And for public schools and some private schools, I believe, there is data also on the percentage of free or reduced price lunch plans in that school. So it gives you some demographic data about, is that student body likely looking for a practice that accepts Medicaid or not? Instead of schools, if we want to think about where are grocery stores, where's potential commercial real estate, which areas are busier, I've turned those on so I can see here. This area did have some grocery stores. I thought it might have been a false positive at first, but like some of these areas up here might be false positives. I can tell they're obviously a little bit less densely populated, a little bit further out of town. I can tell that, one, based off of the lack of dental offices in the area, two, based off of the lack of grocery stores in the area, and three, based off of the size of these shapes. Each of these shapes is called a block group. It's kind of like the pixel for the Census Bureau. It's the smallest scale of analysis that they report on. So they're not going to tell us who lives in your house and how old they are and how much money they make, but they will tell us who lives in each of these block groups. And so if this block group, which has about the same number of people as this block group down here, is this much bigger, we can reasonably assume it's probably a little bit less densely populated. I do have the ability as well to change specialty. So if you're a pediatric dentist and you want to know where other pediatric practices are, you want this entire report or search done for a pediatric dental practice, you can just come up here and switch the specialty. If you're not a general dentist, we do have what we call secondary specialty practices as competition as well. So a practice with the tooth in it is a primary specialty in your specialty. So here's a pediatric dental practice. A practice without the tooth is one that we've identified as having a specialist on staff. So this Bright End Dental obviously probably has a couple GPs and maybe a pediatric dentist. So that's why there is no tooth in this dot here. This is a secondary specialty that you would be competing against. One other really cool feature that we just rolled out to actually even go beyond specialty is looking at particular procedures or services. So I just switched the specialty to implants. And what this means is that we have looked at every dental practice nationwide. We've looked at their website and we've asked, does this website have the word implants on it? And so what you're seeing now is regardless of specialty, every practice with the keyword implants on their website. Now, if I'm starting to think about a specific property or maybe generally an area, so like maybe I'm interested in shirts and I want to see what shirts looks like inside of a 15-minute drive time, just as I kind of start to think about, okay, I grew up in San Antonio, where generally might I want to practice? We can always come over here and enter in a specific town, get data for that area. Obviously, this is a little bit big at about 159,000 people, so we might want to decrease that scale of analysis, but we can also look at specific locations. So here's an address I'm familiar with in Austin. And same thing, the data came back to us instantly. We do have the ability to create what we call snapshot reports, which are kind of these nice little clean PDFs So if you're working with a friend or a mentor or a real estate agent or a bank or whoever, maybe even just for yourself, want to know, okay, hey, how did you choose that location on West 12th Street in Austin? We get this export that can easily be printed off or shared. It gives us the data for the search area that we ran, and also gives us a nice little qualitative description of who's living in the area. So if we're trying to figure out like what is a median household income of $85,000 a year with an average household size of 2.6 and a median age of 33, what does that really mean? Here we're going to get these nice qualitative descriptions, and it's also going to tell us about distinct populations. So to go back to that scenario of like a high income population next to a low income population, that'll come out in these descriptions. This Demographics on Demand tab, as I said, really is focused both on startups and acquisitions. I think startups can use it a little bit more in the sense that you can really go anywhere where there's commercial real estate, whereas acquisitions need specifically a seller. They can only go where somebody's willing to sell them a practice. This Practice Finder tab, however, is specifically geared toward acquisitions. So there are two ways really you can buy a practice. One is with listed practices, and this is kind of the classic way of buying an office, saying, okay, I'm interested in Texas and I want to buy a general dental practice. Personally, I recommend probably leaving the rest of these blank. There aren't that many listings at any point in time, so you won't be inundated with results, irrelevant results. Texas, of course, is the second most populated state, so this is about as many listings as you're going to see anywhere. And when I run this search, you're going to get back all of the results for the last 120 days. We have our research team constantly looking through different brokers' websites to see if anything has been updated. So this is one nice central place to get lots of listings. You can contact the broker directly through our platform if we have their contact info on file. If we don't, we'll just send you directly to wherever we found that listing so that you can contact them directly. We're not in this to broker practices. We don't get in the middle of this. This is purely just making the information available to you and making it easy for you to be able to find the practice to buy. Now, if even coming to our website or our web application and checking these listings all the time sounds like a pain, and I get that, you can even set up what we call a practice priority feed. So this would allow you, if I save this feed, I would instantly start getting an email every single time our team finds a new general dental practice listed for sale in the state of Texas. So this is really convenient. This is a nice feature. And again, this is from across a double-digit number of brokers. Some of them themselves are aggregators of other brokers. So there are quite a few practices listed here. Now, we've, over the years, talked to a lot of aspiring practice owners who've said, hey, I've been trying to buy a practice for 6 months. I've been trying to buy a practice for a year, 2 years. Just nothing's come across my plate that's worked out. So let me just try and reach out to practice owners and see if they'd be interested in selling to me. And actually, John, you mentioned earlier, shared practices. This is actually something that I'll credit George over there with kind of helping with, kind of being involved in the early days, not directly with the development of this product, but George had asked us, hey, can you tell me who all the practices are in this area that came back on my report as opportune? And he was then going to reach out to those practice owners. So what we've developed kind of in response to a similar request is the ability for you to send a handwritten mailer to those practices. So if you said, okay, I'm in Texas and I would like to buy an office in the greater San Antonio area. And the metropolitan area is a little bit different than the county level. So the metropolitan area is kind of what people think of as like the greater San Antonio market. So it includes all of these counties, whereas Bexar County, if we chose that, obviously would be just the central county within greater San Antonio. I'm going to say I want maybe like a PPO practice. So maybe locate that office in a market where people earn between $75,000 and $125,000 a year, kind of middle income area. I want the practice to have a good or elite digital score. So it's it's at least got like a nice, decent website, decent reviews. It doesn't necessarily have to be the best one, but I want to make sure it doesn't like not have a website or it's got really bad reviews. Also make sure that the market isn't super, super competitive. So at least 1,500 residents per general dental office, probably not a big concern in most of San Antonio. And then I'll make sure also that the practice has no more than one location, because I don't really want to reach out to Heartland or Pacific Dental or Bright End about trying to buy their offices. And what I get back is a map and a list of all of the practices that met my search criteria. So I can scroll through them individually. Some people like to click on them and see who they are, see, if maybe the doctor looks like they might be interested in selling soon, or see if the practice looks like a good fit with their vision. Other people like to just say, you know what, I want to contact everybody here. And then we're going to design this mailer that's going to go out. So we give you a couple of templates. Palm trees can go on the front of this postcard, a sailboat. I am always going to recommend, though, a custom image, a picture of you, family, pets, anything along those lines that really personalizes this and allows the recipient to feel connected to you, or feel like you really, have gone through the effort to introduce yourself, and they feel like they know who their legacy is going to be left with, and who the patients are going to be left with is a very strong recommendation of mine. Just for the purposes of this call, choose the palm trees, though. We'll actually handwrite out for you whatever message you're going to tell us to write here. We're, again, not going to get in the middle of this. We're not going to try and broker the sale. We're just connecting you with practice owners. I'm going to choose this neater handwriting. Again, we are going to handwrite it, so it's not like some cheesy font or anything, but do you just want us to write it more neatly or more sloppily? And then we're going to write out whatever our message is. Make sure to include, of course, some contact info here and just kind of a brief description. And then all we charge is $2.50 per mailer. So you can say I've got 108 practices here, $270. Obviously, way, way, way cheaper than working with a broker who's going to charge typically somewhere between 5 and 10% for that transition. Not saying that you shouldn't have professionals look at the terms of that transition. You definitely should. But this is a really, really cool tool for helping you find a practice to buy. And then lastly here, at least for now, I think over the course of everyone's the life of their subscription here through May 31st of 2024, you're going to see a lot of improvements coming. But we do also have some other really cool tools here. For one, we talked about restrictive covenants earlier. So if you want to visualize where those are, I've got some in my account in Texas as well as in New Jersey. If I came back over to the Demographics on Demand tab and I ran an area search, say, in Austin, just run one real quick. And let's just say something like that. I want to see my restrictive covenants. I can see right here, okay, I can't practice in that market. So it doesn't matter if any of these areas are good. I've signed a contract saying I'm not going to practice there. So you can get those restrictive covenants started in this My Search tab under restrictive covenants, of course. We do also have this project timeline that helps keep you on track. So if you tell me, hey, Kent, I want to become a practice owner January 1, 2025, we're going to reverse engineer for you some of the high level stuff that you need to be doing when. We're not trying to replace a consultant. We're not going to replace a consultant here if that's somebody that you want to work with. But we will let you know, hey, roughly to stay on track, this is about when you want to be doing specific things. We can also recommend for you other specific professionals that we work with and we vetted, we know well. So we do have some of those people here. Really the idea is, as I said earlier, to help you transition into practice ownership. We started as a market research company, but as you can see, we've obviously started to move beyond that a little bit. And so there's just gonna be a lot more resources here over the course of the next couple of months to help make that transition for you as easy as possible. So I hope you're able to utilize those tools. If you have any questions, please do feel free to reach out to our team directly. We're happy to help with anything about the platform itself and how to use it, to even specific questions about your search process. If you want to know, hey, is this a good area? Is that a bad area? Please do feel free to reach out to our team.
All right, awesome. That is amazing. I even just honestly encourage any of our members to just kind of, even if you don't know any of like what your future looks like or what you think, just play around. It's a fun tool to kind of play around with and mess around with. You'll start to kind of get the feel of how demographics changes based off of the different ways that you alter those sliding scales. And honestly, in the last year as well, the previous subscription that I had, I just kind of did that, right? I would just kind of, I would say, hey, if I brought population density all the way up here, how does it change the scale? How does it change the maps and things like that? So, I mean, this tool, obviously, you kind of just ran through all of the amazing features on it, which is really, really cool. And I think it's an amazing opportunity for our members that maybe we don't necessarily understand how great of a tool it is right now. But I'm sure 5 years in the future, we're going to think, oh my goodness, I can't believe I wasn't on there every single day using that. So.
Yeah, well, thanks, John. I appreciate your very helpful and honest review, I'm sure, of our Dentagraphics platform. And yeah, really thank you for being here. Thanks for having me on. Like I said, anyone who has any questions, please do feel free to reach out to anyone on our team, even to me directly. I'm Kent@dentagraphics.com, and happy to help.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate everyone who watched this episode. Yeah, thanks for being on here. This was amazing.
Thank you.
Okay. You have a good night.
You too.
All right. Bye.